Hey, opposing gloves here. I'm wearing a hat. Today we're going to be talking about mixed meter or mixed meter. If you didn't understand what I just said, mixed meter is when you have something that you want to write, but it's got unusual places where you are putting the emphasis, the beat, the stress, whatever you want to call it. You're putting it in a weird spot. It's not consistent. That's the big deal here. Not consistent. So what do? You have to redefine your meter every measure. That's what you have to do. Now, I've come up with a very simple example of mixed meter, but there are times where if it repeats enough, it is worth usually writing out a time signature. So first, let's just look at this from a mixed meter standpoint. Then we'll get into some things about ways to make this easier for other people to interpret, which is the whole reason why a lot of these conventions exist, which is why I think it's valuable to cover, even though we are just writing music in a sequencer. So if we come in here, you notice that I have 1, 2, 3, but then I've got this set of 4, and then another set of 3, and another set of 4. And it's very evident that that's my meter down here. The FL makes this sort of a pain. We're going to talk about this. It's on their list of things they want to fix. They want to add time signatures to their sequencer. I am all for that, man. Just do that as soon as you can. I am so down. So anyways, what we're going to do, and maybe by the time you've watched this video, it will be a thing. I don't know. But here, so I want to place my emphasis like so. And so this is sort of, we're going to say that this does not stay consistent. We're going to change my emphasis later. But for very simplistic reasons, we're going to do this. And so if I play this, so you see we have this sort of cool thing going on. Now, if I were to keep repeating this, it would actually be worth writing out a time signature for this. So if you'd be like, what kind of time signature do I write? Well, you just remember that the bottom note is the note that gets the beat. So in this case, we're using quarter notes. So the quarter note would get the beat. So the bottom number would be 4. And then how many beats do we have in a measure? Well, we have 3 plus 4. So this would be 7, 4. And the reason why this would be helpful for the musician is, and also for the printer, simply because it's a super big pain if you're printing out a score to have 3, 4, and then a 4, 4, and then a 3, 4, and then a 4, 4. If your thing stays consistent with the way it stresses, the emphasis, emphasize, whatever you want to call it, if it stays the same, then just make a time signature, and at the top you would write 7, 7, 4, and you would equals, and then you would have 3, 4 plus 4, 4. And this is something that's very common. They use it in 5, 4 as well. So let's look at 5, 4. It's a little easier to understand. So 5, 4, right? We would count it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5. But sometimes they'll write 5, 4 equals 2, 4 plus 3, 4. So there's 5 beats, but they want you to interpret it like this, with the 2 first and then the 3. So they say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And sometimes it'll be the other way around. So they'll say, I want you to interpret it as 3, 4 plus 2, 4. So they'll go a collection of 3 plus a collection of 2. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so that's the reason why you would do that. If it repeats, the musician can just get in their groove and away they go. But in this case, for mixed meter, we're going to assume it's not a repeating thing. And so what does this mean? Well, we have, in this case, I've made it like the previous example, but let's say that later on, we're going to do this again. So we're going to control C and then control V, or just control B in the first place, I guess. But you say, now I want my meter to do this, like something weird. And then something like, I don't know, this. And so you begin to do strange things. And so it makes it necessary to identify where these stresses will go. It's only really necessary if it really alters your meter. Otherwise, you could just use an accent and just call it syncopated. So, however, you're still basically saying that there's some sort of underlying stress on a hierarchy of stresses that happen. So in this case, you're completely obliterating that hierarchy. So this is sort of a little more out there, a little more strange music, and there's lots of interesting things you can really do with it. Something that's highly underused by just people, because it is kind of a strange thing. Even in general notation software where you can do time signatures no problem, it's underused quite a bit. So, and other times people they'll do something like I've done here, even though it's in even though they could have written like 7/4. Why? Because musicians like 3/4/4/4. Maybe they like 3/4/4/4. Maybe they change something somewhere. One time they change it, so it makes it kind of weird. Like maybe you do it twice in a row, but then you put one weird thing, and then you do it like one more time in a row, and then you do another weird thing, and you do 2 more times in a row. So you have this weird thing where you're like not really sure. So you just do what you think is best. You make a judgment call. So in our sequencer, this is how we do it. Now you'll notice here. So that's a little bit about the meter, why it's done that way. And this is my basic example. So that's that. Now, when it's a repeating pattern like that, like 5/4, like I gave you an example of, that's called odd meter. So that's when you have like 2 plus 3, and it's going to stay that way. That's just odd meter. And it's just the way it is. Now, it's mixed meter when you have those unusual changes like I was talking about. Now let's look at this. Now let's say that you're going to identify, 3/4/4/4. Well, you see here that these grids, my playlist matches this. So go 4/4, and you see I have 4 blocks, 4 measures, and then over here 3/4, 3 measures. And I have to set this up like this. FL Studios is looking at adding time signatures, which I'm 100% for. Maybe they'll exist by the time you see this video, but for now, I'm going to assume they don't exist. So in the piano roll, you see it's not like this. I don't know how to combine these two. You can do it on both. I'm only going to show you on one, and I find it more valuable to see it on my sequencer because if you write more than one part, it is so unworth it to go through and write out this on every single one. Like, so you'll see why in a second. One way you might consider seeing your rhythm is by creating notes that are the length. So you see this is 3/4 and then 4/4. And then just remember that that's your F6 notes. Pick a note you're not going to use, at least not very often. That way you can always come up there as a reference. That's one thing that I'll do to help myself see things through all my layers and patterns and stuff. So I keep that on, and then I'll have my ghost channels on so I can go up there and look. I'm like, oh, this is the 3/4 measure, because sometimes you lose track. But anyways, let's look at this. So you see here, these are called markers, and you can add a marker by simply right-clicking, add marker, or you can come up here to like tools or whatever. It's been forever since I've come up here to look in here. I'm not even sure where it is in here. Anyways, you hit Alt-T. So if you hit Alt-T, it'll bring up marker name. So you can add a marker, marker. Now you notice that it put the marker over here. This is kind of a weird thing. You might be going, why did it put the marker where our thing is not there? Our playlist head is over here. Well, the way FL does this, and it does this with most things, is it will always put, in this case, a marker where your first complete measure is. So here's our first complete measure. This one's not complete. See how there's no bar line? Now this is the first complete measure, so it will put it here. So if we hit Alt-T and then typed yes, yes sir, bang, there it is, right where we predicted it would go. So delete that. That's just how markers work. So when you're going in here, you're going to want to zoom in and do that. Another thing, you can just drag them. Another bummer about this system, and you see it changes where the highlights go. You might be wondering, how do I get the highlights? Because yours probably isn't doing it right now. You go to View, Grid, Time Segments. So Grid, Time Segments, and then to Markers. On Markers, it will highlight that. So that's really handy dandy. That allows you to see your time signature in this sort of a way. However, as I said, it doesn't carry over to the piano roll. And another bummer is if we were to like copy or well, let's just say we hit Control B, right? Because we want to duplicate it. Check it out. It does not copy. It only copies the pattern. It does not copy these markers. So, and it sort of makes sense, but it's a bummer because we're using it as our time signature. So the other way, of course, is to create a pattern or a playlist. So let's come in here and let's say, oh, this is, whoa, that is loud. That also sounded like my thing is unmuted, which it is. Okay, so we're just going to mute it, right? Because we don't ever want to hear it. And all we're going to use it for is to see our meter. So we see this is a measure of 3, this is a measure of 4, this is a measure of 3. You may even consider putting them on separate notes. That way you can see your 3s easily from your 4s. So say, oh, here's my all. And then as you're working and doing your metering things, you can come up here and be like, oh, look, there's one. Oh, we're on these. This is supposed to be a 3. This is supposed to be a 4. Because you basically have to ignore the grid. Oh, one other thing. When you do this, go to your project tab, set your beats per bar to 1. So you see, I gave the quarter note the beat. It depends on whatever you want to give the beat. You want to give the eighth note a beat, make it 2, or whatever. And so steps per beat 4, and beats per bar. You set that to 1. And the reason you do is so that basically every measure is now equivalent to 1 beat. That way, when you do this, this makes sense. So anyways, that's a little complicated, but that's mixed meter. It's something that is not used, and I don't use too often. But occasionally it's sort of a neat trick to have in your bag. It's also something that you may have accidentally found yourself using if you've ever written a break of some kind. So you might find out that like, oh, I want my break to have 3 beats, but I'm got 4 beats. And so a lot of people will fill up all 4 beats, and then for whatever reason, they might be dissatisfied and go back to 3 and just shift everything over and deal with the fact that their entire thing's off by a little bit. I do that all the time. And honestly, I think that's really great when someone follows their instincts more than the way something looks. But sometimes it's also a very bad thing, depending on if they're very experienced or inexperienced. So I think following what you think sounds good is always a good idea. You find out what you like. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.